The chosen one. The storm raged inside you, unseen by the world. It wasn't thunder or wind, it was the silent collision between who you were and who you were meant to become. The crowd around you laughed, moved, existed, but you felt the pulse of something ancient beneath the noise, calling your name in a language your mind did not yet understand. You had always known you were different. The laughter of others sounded distant, their joy shallow, their words like echoes through fog. You felt the invisible line dividing you from them, a line of perception, not pride. For in your silence, you sensed the hum of eternity, the weight of unseen truth, pressing gently against your heart. That feeling was not loneliness. It was awakening. You tried to silence it, to blend in, to laugh when they laughed. Yet every smile felt borrowed, every word rehearsed. You wondered, why can't I be like them? But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, because you were never meant to be. You are the chosen one, not in arrogance, but in alignment. Chosen not above others, but apart from them, set aside for something only your soul remembers. The energy within you disturbs the false peace of ordinary rooms. When you walk in, people sense something they cannot name. Some are drawn, some are threatened, and few truly understand. You carry light, but to those still trapped in darkness, even light can feel like pain. And so, you began to withdraw, not from fear, but from fatigue. Every conversation drained you. Every room felt too loud, too shallow. Solitude became sanctuary, not an escape, but a return. In the silence, you could finally breathe. You could finally listen. There, in your solitude, you began to sense a pattern. The things that broke you were never random. The rejections, the loneliness, the restless nights, they were not punishments, but preparations. The universe had been shaping you through isolation, teaching you to hear what others ignore. You began to notice signs, numbers, dreams, moments that seemed too perfect to be accidents. The world was speaking in whispers and symbols. You started to realize that your pain was sacred, that it was awakening something divine inside you. Still, you resisted. Doubt crept in like a shadow. What if I'm just imagining this? What if none of this is real? But the signs kept coming. The right words at the right time. The sudden feeling that someone or something was watching over you. Every time you tried to dismiss it, a new synchronicity appeared. More precise, more undeniable. It was no longer about belief. It was about surrender. You are not lost. You are being called out. You are being refined by the fire of misunderstanding, by the silence of separation. Every chosen one must walk through darkness before they carry light. You looked up one night, alone beneath the indifferent stars, and felt it a warmth in your chest that didn't come from the world around you. A message without words, a knowing without proof. You realized that your disconnection was not a curse, it was a compass. The world was loud, but truth was quiet. And in the stillness, you heard it clearly for the first time. You were chosen to wake the sleeping, and as the night pressed in, the realization both comforted and terrified you. For being chosen meant more than enlightenment, it meant responsibility. It meant sacrifice. Your life would no longer belong entirely to you. This was the beginning of the transformation, the threshold between the old self and the awakened one. You did not ask for it, but destiny rarely asks permission. The call had been given. The path had been lit. Now you must decide whether to follow it. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The chosen one. The silence after the calling was heavier than sound. You thought the revelation would bring peace, but instead, it brought chaos. For every truth uncovered, another question rose to challenge it. You had glimpsed your purpose, yet the path ahead dissolved into fog. You felt both blessed and burdened. Chosen, but for what? The very word echoed through your mind like a secret too vast to carry. You tried to explain it to others, but they stared blankly, their eyes glazed with polite confusion. They could not hear what you heard, nor see what you saw. Their world was built on walls you could no longer live within. At first, you doubted yourself. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps the solitude had broken something inside you. But deep down, you knew. Something within was being rewritten. Your old identity no longer fit. You were shedding a version of yourself that the world once applauded. You woke each morning feeling the tension between two realities, the ordinary and the divine. The first demanded compliance. The second demanded surrender, and you stood trembling between them, afraid to lose one and unready to embrace the other. There were days you tried to return to normalcy. You went to familiar places, spoke familiar words, laughed familiar laughs, but everything felt foreign. It was as if life had moved one dimension deeper, and only you noticed. Every conversation was transparent. Every smile carried weight. You could see beneath surfaces, see the pain people hid, the fear behind their ambition. The gift became a burden. Empathy burned through you like fire. You began to absorb the emotions of those around you, their sadness, their confusion, their chaos. Their energy clung to you long after they left. You learned that being chosen was not about being exalted, but about being exposed, raw, open, vulnerable. You tried to numb it. Music, distraction, work. But the universe has its own way of reclaiming attention. The signs grew louder, the coincidences sharper. Dreams began to speak. You woke at 3:33 a.m., heart pounding, feeling a presence in the room. A reminder that your awakening was not imagination, but initiation. It was around this time that the resistance began. Not from strangers, but from those closest to you. Friends accused you of being distant. Family said you'd changed, and you had. But how could you explain that change when you yourself barely understood it? You were learning that enlightenment often looks like madness to those still asleep. That solitude, once a comfort, can turn into exile. You began to feel the full gravity of your awakening, the way it pulled you away from everything you once knew. But beneath the pain, there was a strange serenity. You began to trust the unseen, to believe that even confusion serves the divine. You no longer needed every answer. You only needed alignment. In your quiet moments, the voice returned, not loud, not external, but subtle, like a vibration within your chest. It said, "You are not alone in this." You were reminded that every chosen soul must walk the path of separation before they meet their tribe. The loneliness was never punishment, it was preparation. The universe was clearing your space, removing the ones who could not walk where you were going. The world began to test your conviction. Opportunities arose that promised comfort, but required compromise. You felt the temptation to retreat, to silence your inner fire for the sake of peace. Yet every time you tried, your spirit rebelled. It would rather be misunderstood than muzzled. You began to realize that being chosen does not mean being celebrated. It means being refined. It means being broken open until you can hold more light. And so, you stayed. You endured the silence. You faced the misunderstanding. You carried the ache of separation with quiet dignity, because somewhere inside, you knew that the pain was proof of progress. The old you was dying, and in its ashes, something eternal was forming. You looked into the mirror one night, and the reflection staring back was unfamiliar. Eyes sharper, calmer, filled with quiet knowing. It was then you understood. Awakening doesn't make you someone new. It reveals who you always were. You are the bridge between worlds, the one who feels deeply so others may awaken slowly, the one who carries what others cannot see. And though your shoulders tremble beneath the weight of awakening, you will not collapse. You were chosen because you could bear it. This chapter of silence will not last forever. Something within you is preparing to rise. A moment is coming when the energy you've been storing will turn into motion, a divine confrontation, a revelation through chaos. Until then, breathe, trust the process. Let the fire inside you refine, not destroy. Because the next chapter will not be about survival. It will be about transformation. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. The Chosen One. The silence that once comforted you began to suffocate. What had started as divine guidance now felt like abandonment. The voice that once whispered wisdom grew quiet, and for the first time, you felt truly lost. The path ahead was endless sand. No direction, no sign, no certainty. You looked up at the sky and asked the question that burned in every chosen soul. Why would you call me? Only to disappear. Days passed without meaning. You went through motions, working, speaking, pretending, but your spirit was parched. The once blazing fire of purpose flickered low, barely aglow beneath the ashes of exhaustion. You wondered if perhaps you had misunderstood everything. Maybe there was no calling. Maybe you were not chosen. Maybe you had just been chasing echoes in an empty canyon. You began to feel the cold edges of despair. The divine presence that had once wrapped around your soul now seemed like a distant memory. Every prayer returned unanswered, every sign turned into static. You screamed into the silence, but only your own voice came back. This was not the awakening you imagined. This was the wilderness, the divine test. In that barren space, your faith was stripped of comfort, your strength of certainty. The universe was not punishing you, it was purifying you. You were being emptied so that something greater could fill you. But in the moment, it only felt like loss. You sat one night beneath a starless sky, too tired to seek, too wounded to hope. For the first time, you considered turning back, returning to the old life, the easier one, where belief was optional and ignorance was peace. But just as you were ready to give up, something subtle stirred. A thought, barely a whisper. The silence is not absence, it's instruction. It was not that the voice had left you, it was that it had changed form. The divine was no longer speaking to you, it was speaking through you. You began to notice how your pain sharpened your perception, how your stillness revealed truths hidden in plain sight. You saw the lessons woven into your struggles, the people who left, the doors that closed, the delays that protected. Every unanswered prayer had been an act of mercy, disguised as rejection. You realized that doubt was not the opposite of faith, it was its crucible. Faith without doubt is obedience, but faith that survives doubt becomes revelation. You began to rebuild your belief from the ground up, not with borrowed truths, but with your own scars as scripture. Every disappointment became a verse, every tear, a translation of divine language. Still, the loneliness lingered. You looked for signs of hope, but none came easily. The world moved on, indifferent to your inner transformation. You started to see how little most people cared for truth, how they traded authenticity for applause, how they silenced their souls to fit the noise. It angered you. It saddened you. It tempted you to retreat again. But a faint light flickered inside the memory of your calling, the realization that you were not meant to hide forever. The desert was not the end. It was initiation. One evening, you stood before your reflection again. This time, your eyes were not filled with certainty, but endurance. You whispered to yourself, "Even if I cannot see the path, I will walk it." And as you spoke, the air shifted, not with thunder, but with presence. A still, electric awareness filled the room. You felt something ancient awaken inside you, the return of your power, not as fire, but as light, calm, steady, knowing. You understood that the chosen are not those who never doubt. They are those who keep walking when doubt is all that remains. Your spirit began to heal. The silence, once unbearable, became sacred again. You could feel the unseen hands guiding you, not with answers, but with alignment. The universe had never left. It was waiting for you to grow quiet enough to hear. Now, when the storms came, you no longer feared them. You recognized them as teachers. When people misunderstood you, you no longer defended yourself. You understood that truth does not need to be explained. It only needs to be embodied. The desert had changed you. The doubt had deepened you. And as you stepped forward, you felt it a shift in the air. A sense that something larger was preparing to reveal itself. The time of silence was ending. A new current was rising, one that would soon test everything you had learned. The next chapter of your awakening would not take place in isolation. It would unfold in confrontation with the world, with illusion, with destiny itself. Breathe deeply, chosen soul. The storm is coming again, but this time, it comes for your revelation. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, the chosen one. The storm returned not outside, but within. You had survived the silence of the desert, but now the universe called you into confrontation. This time, the battle would not be with uncertainty, it would be with yourself. The awakening that once felt pure began to darken. You saw not only the light within you, but also the shadow it cast. The same sensitivity that allowed you to feel the divine now exposed you to the heaviness of fear, jealousy, and anger buried deep within your soul. You realized that enlightenment was not ascension, it was excavation. Every illusion you had built to feel worthy began to crumble. The ego, dressed as humility, whispered its final lies. You are special. You are above them. You are chosen. But true awakening demanded honesty, not superiority. And so, the mirror turned. You began to see the truth of your own reflection, not the idealized self you had been crafting, but the one beneath, trembling, imperfect, longing for validation. The divine light had not come to glorify you. It had come to purify you. You fought it. You resisted the humility it demanded. How could you feel chosen and yet so fragile? How could divine purpose coexist with such human weakness? But as you wrestled, something broke open inside you, a surrender deeper than faith, softer than strength. You understood that being chosen was not about being exalted above the world, but being immersed in it, feeling its pain, carrying its chaos, healing through compassion rather than control. The divine does not choose the perfect, it perfects the willing. You began to notice how the same energy that once drew people to you now began to repel them. You were a mirror too clear, too honest. Some could not face the reflection you offered. Others clung to you, mistaking your light for their own salvation. And in this imbalance, your heart grew weary. You wanted to help everyone, but you realized that not everyone wanted to be healed. Some only wanted your light to make their darkness comfortable. You learned the hardest truth of all, that love without boundaries is not divine. It is destructive. The shadow within you whispered that walking away was cruelty, that detachment was betrayal. But your spirit knew that sometimes distance is the most sacred form of love. You cannot carry others to their awakening. You can only embody yours. One night, as you sat in stillness, you heard the voice again, not as before, but clearer, colder, more demanding. It said, "If you wish to walk in the light, you must embrace your shadow." You trembled. Every part of you that still clung to image, to righteousness, to control, began to unravel. Memories resurfaced, wounds you thought were healed, mistakes you thought were forgiven. You faced them not as failures, but as fragments of your becoming. You saw how even your pain had been sacred, how every betrayal had carved space for compassion, how every loss had shaped your depth. The shadow was never your enemy, it was your teacher. You began to walk differently, not as someone who had conquered darkness, but as someone who had befriended it. You stopped seeking light as escape and started carrying it into the unseen places. That is when the shift happened. People began to feel something new in your presence, not just inspiration, but peace. You no longer needed to prove your worth. You no longer needed to be understood. You had moved beyond the performance of enlightenment into the quiet power of authenticity. Yet this peace came with a price. The more you embodied truth, the more the false around you began to tremble. People who once admired you began to resent you. Systems that once accepted you began to reject you. The light within you had become too bright for comfort. You realized that revelation always provokes resistance, that every awakening threatens the order of illusion. And so, the universe tested your resolve again. It presented you with choices, comfort or calling, safety or surrender. You stood at the crossroads of destiny, your heart divided between peace and purpose. You knew that if you chose comfort, you would lose the light. But if you chose truth, you would lose the world. That night, you walked outside beneath a sky split by lightning. The storm mirrored your inner war, every flash, a glimpse of clarity, every thunder, a reminder of consequence. You whispered to the heavens, "If I must lose everything to find you, let it be so." The wind shifted. The rain began to fall, not violently, but as if blessing your decision. The shadow within you softened, merging with the light it once feared. You realized that divinity was never about perfection, it was about wholeness. The next morning, you woke with calm certainty. The path was not clearer, but your courage was. The doubts were still there, but they no longer ruled you. You had faced the darkness within, and in doing so, you had disarmed it. You are no longer merely awakened, you are aligned. But the journey is far from over. For now that you have found balance within, the world will seek to break it. The next test will not come from inside you, it will come from outside. The opposition is coming, not to destroy you, but to reveal the strength you've built in silence. Prepare yourself, chosen soul. The storm that approaches will not end you, it will unveil you. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. The chosen one. The morning after the storm, the air felt still, too still. You sensed it immediately. The peace was not real, it was the pause before impact. The universe was shifting again, preparing to test what your awakening had built. You thought you had already faced the worst, the solitude, the doubt, the shadow. But this was different. This was the fire meant not to burn you, but to prove what could not be destroyed. At first, it came quietly. Subtle disruptions, misunderstandings, the betrayal of someone you trusted. A door you thought was certain, suddenly closing. Each event small, but each cutting deeper than it should have. You wondered if you had somehow fallen out of alignment. You prayed, but the answers came in riddles. Then the real storm arrived. Everything that had once seemed secure began to crumble. Friendships faded. Opportunities vanished. The people who once praised you began to whisper. You found yourself accused of things you never said, blamed for wounds you never caused. The world that once seemed eager to understand your light now turned its back on it. The lesson was merciless. Those who carry truth will always be tested by falsehood. You tried to defend yourself, to explain, to hold on to reason, but the fire burned hotter. The more you fought, the more you lost, until finally, exhaustion brought silence. And in that silence, something sacred happened. You began to see how every flame had purpose. The lies, the losses, the isolation, they were not chaos, they were cleansing. The fire was not punishing you, it was refining you. Everything false within you, ego, attachment, fear, was being burned away. Still, the pain was real. The nights were long. You questioned why the divine would ask so much from one soul. You felt stripped, vulnerable, exposed, and yet, beneath the ashes of your old identity, a deeper strength began to rise. You remembered what the silence had taught you. Surrender is not weakness, it is transformation. One evening, as the weight of it all pressed upon you, you fell to your knees. No prayer, no words, just a raw sound of surrender. And then, without warning, clarity descended like fire through your veins. It wasn't gentle, it was fierce, undeniable. You saw visions not of future glory, but of purpose. You saw yourself walking through ruins, carrying light not to escape the darkness, but to guide others through it. You realized your trials had never been about survival. They were training. The fire was teaching you to stand in chaos and not lose peace, to be rejected and not lose compassion, to be misunderstood and still remain true. You began to notice how your energy changed. Where once you trembled, you now stood still. Where once you reacted, you now observed. The flames around you no longer consumed you. They revealed you. You walked through the days differently now, quietly, powerful, unshaken. People sensed it. Some were drawn to your calm. Others grew uneasy, sensing that something within you no longer played by the old rules of fear. You became a mirror once again, but this time, your reflection offered something new. Proof that resilience is holy. The same fire that once terrified you became your ally. You realized that divine power does not shield you from pain. It transforms pain into purpose. You were no longer asking, why me? But for what reason was this given to me? And with that shift, everything changed. The voices of doubt fell silent. The accusations lost their sting. You no longer needed to justify your light to those committed to misunderstanding it. You had stepped beyond the need for validation. Then came the final test. The universe placed before you the very thing you had prayed for years ago. The opportunity, the recognition, the doorway you once thought was your destiny. But now, it came with a cost, your integrity. To take it meant betraying your truth. Your heart raced. Every part of you that had longed for belonging screamed yes. But your soul, steady and scarred, whispered no. You walked away. Not out of fear, but out of alignment. And in that moment, the fire bowed before you. You had passed the test. When the flames cleared, you stood different, not brighter, not louder, but anchored. The chaos that once ruled your emotions now bowed to your stillness. You understood that the divine does not remove your storms. It teaches you to command them. That night, under the dim glow of a single candle, you realized the truth. Being chosen does not mean being spared. It means being shaped. Every wound had been a doorway. Every loss, a lesson. Every delay, divine timing. The fire had not destroyed you. It had revealed your essence. You were no longer simply awakened, you were reborn. But even rebirth carries a price. For once you rise from the ashes, the world will see you differently. Some will seek your wisdom, others will seek your fall. The true battle is about to begin. The confrontation, not between you and your past, but between your light and the systems that fear it. Prepare, chosen one. The next chapter will be the revelation the fire was leading you toward. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The chosen one. The fire had ended, but the world around you still smoldered. You stood in the ruins of what once defined you, your past, your expectations, your old sense of belonging. Nothing remained untouched. And yet, you felt something sacred stirring within the emptiness. This was not peace. It was power. Silent, still, unmovable. You had faced the loneliness of calling, the silence of doubt, the shadow of revelation, and the trial of fire. And now, what stood before you was the final passage not into perfection, but into purpose. The universe was not asking for your faith anymore. It was asking for your embodiment. The signs intensified. People who once rejected you began to return, drawn by something they could not explain. Some sought your guidance, others your light, and a few came to test your strength. You realized that your energy had shifted your very presence, now mirrored truth, and truth always reveals. When you spoke, silence followed. Not because you demanded it, but because the frequency of your words carried weight. You were no longer explaining the light, you had become it. But as the world began to recognize your transformation, darkness moved again quietly, cleverly. It came not as opposition, but as imitation. The false lights appeared, loud and confident, promising easy peace and quick ascension. They mocked your stillness, confused your humility for weakness. You saw how many were being deceived, chasing noise instead of wisdom, chasing power without surrender. And something inside you ached, not with pride, but with compassion. You understood then that ascension was not a ladder to climb, but a descent into depth. To rise, you must first fall inward. To lead, you must first kneel before truth. So, you stepped back into the world not as a preacher, not as a savior, but as a mirror of remembrance. You did not teach through sermons, but through silence, through your calm presence in chaos, through your forgiveness in betrayal, through your love that asked for nothing in return. This was your final initiation, the test of staying soft in a hard world. You began to feel the pulse of divinity in ordinary things, the wind through leaves, the rhythm of footsteps, the quiet breath between heartbeats. Life itself had become the scripture you once searched for. You realized that heaven was never somewhere else. It was a state of being, carried within those who choose truth over comfort. Still, challenges continued. You were not exempt from pain, but pain no longer defined you. When storms came, you stood still, not because they didn't shake you, but because you had learned the difference between movement and meaning. The people around you began to change. Some were drawn to your light, others disappeared from it. You no longer chased either outcome. You understood that every connection serves a season, and every departure serves alignment. The divine no longer spoke in visions or voices. It spoke through intuition, through timing, through the flow of life itself. You had become fluent in its language. Then came the revelation, the one the entire journey had been preparing you for. You were never chosen to escape the world. You were chosen to transform within it, to carry light, not above others, but among them, to move through suffering without losing compassion, to walk through darkness and leave trails of understanding behind you. That is the sacred paradox of awakening, to become human enough to feel everything, and divine enough to transcend it. You stood before a mirror one final time. The reflection no longer confused you. You did not see a prophet, or a teacher, or a victim of destiny. You saw a soul, infinite and imperfect, finally at peace with both. You smiled, not because the journey was easy, but because it was real. Every loss, every silence, every flame had led you here to this quiet certainty that everything had meaning. You understood now that divinity does not crown you, it humbles you. It makes you walk among the broken, not above them. And so, you return to the world not as the same person, but as the same presence, awakened. When people asked what had changed, you simply said, nothing, and everything. For the truth is this: the chosen are not made by miracles, but by endurance. Not by glory, but by grace. The universe did not choose you to be greater, it chose you to be genuine, to remind others, through your life, that light is not something to be reached, it is something to be remembered. And now, your story continues not as a chapter, but as a vibration carried through time. Every word you speak, every silence you keep, every act of compassion becomes a thread in the divine tapestry. The world will still test you. It will still misunderstand you, but this time, you will not waver, because you no longer seek the path. You are the path. You no longer search for the light. You are the light. And that, chosen one, is the revelation the fire was preparing you for all along. Breathe. Stand tall. Walk in quiet power. The storm no longer defines you, it follows you, bowing to your calm. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment.